Hi friends, I'm Pam and welcome to A Scrappy Little Joy. Today I'm sharing something brand new on my channel, which is something that has been in the making for as long as I can remember. In short, it is an opportunity to demystify the art of cheerful scrappy quilting one block at a time. The way things are going to work is that every Wednesday I'll be sharing a quilt block. I will be sewing a quilt block together with you, which we're calling the Weekly Whim. And of course, we have to make the Weekly Whim on Wednesday for obvious reasons. So what we're doing is I'm going to be starting with today's block. This is our block. It's called a dainty dash, kind of a little spin on a traditional churn dash block with skinny rails on the sides and the top. But what I'm going to do is walk through my process of scrappy quilting that starts with just one block and builds with other blocks by choosing designs, choosing blocks that are similar and cohesive or maybe just a little off kilter, but building our fabric stash that we can continue to use as we go along. So let's just go ahead and get started. And first of all, what you want to be looking for down in the description is a link to a couple of things. This is what you'll find every week. This is our Weekly Whim, the Weekly Whim, and it is the block cutting instructions. It's going to show you what our block looks like here. It's going to show you all of our parts, block, fabric A, B, C, D, E, etc., so that you have an opportunity to go and select those fabrics and then bring them back to the video to be able to sew along with me. All the cutting instructions are going to be here, and that is in the description section below. Also, for this first week, but this will always be there, the downloadable links are going to be, what you're linking to is my blog. So that's where you're going to find all of these instructions, all of these cutting instructions. But you'll also find our little letter tile sheet, and I've printed this simply for your ability to keep track of what fabrics you're using where, and you'll see that I've just cut all of these out. I've made A through Z just because why couldn't we? We're probably not ever going to have that many pieces or that many fabrics in one block, but you know, who knows. But you'll see I've got fabric A, B, C, D, and E here with our little letter tiles. It just makes your life a little bit easier if you don't have that type of a way to keep track of your fabrics. So first things first, if you have a look at today's Weekly Whim block cutting instructions, you've got all the things right here. What I want to show you is specifically if you're looking at our block, you will note that at a distance it's lighter, low volume with blue churn dash. With the blue churn dash pieces. Now, if you take a look at this, you can see that you really could use all of the same colors, all of the same fabric in these locations. That would be the traditional simplest way to do it. But if you change up, and maybe even, in my case, I'm choosing the same color, I'm just choosing a different print for this part, and each different component to this block that is different, call it, this is one component, the corners are one component, and the center is a component. I'm choosing a different fabric, and there is a really important reason for that with respect to scrappy quilting. The bottom line is, as many fabrics as we put in our one block, that's the amount of fabrics then we have to pull from later on. And so while I'm thinking about it, I want to share, while we're on that topic, I want to share my box, right? So this is all of the fabrics from this one block. For next week's block, I will be choosing from these fabrics, not many, however many I want, but then I can add other fabrics to this box each week so that when I make another block, I can keep revisiting, and then our fabrics are showing up in various places in our quilt project. So this is key. Our box is key if you want to keep up with building your blocks going forward. Okay, so what we're going to do is just do a very simple block construction. This is not a tricky block, churn dash. That's why we're starting with it. Also, our block is a 9-inch block. We will be making various size blocks. And if you are familiar with the old style of sampler quilts, if not, look them up a little bit. There's some cool sampler quilt history that is really worth understanding a little bit more. But we're just going to start with this block today. We're going to make it simple. It's our 9-inch block, and we're calling it a dainty dash. Okay, so first things first, we're going to start with our fabric C and our fabric D. These represent our triangles, or our half square triangles in the corner. The first thing we're going to do is draw a diagonal line on the back of the fabric. What is that? The fabric C, so the lighter fabric. I'm choosing fabric C because it's the lighter fabric. That's the only criteria. You put it on the one that is the lightest, and then that way you can see it well. So I'm just going to draw a diagonal line, and you can use whatever pencil. I'm a regular pencil sort of girl, so I just use a regular pencil, but you can use all kinds of fancy schmancy little pencils or pens or marking tools if you like. I tend to start in the middle and then go this way, otherwise it can kind of twist up my fabric. But see, I've got those diagonal lines on the back side of my fabric C triangles. Okay, so now I'm just going to sandwich these together. One fabric D and one fabric C, right sides together, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch. I have to take my shoe off. I don't know about you, but I like to sew with bare feet, so I often I'll take both shoes off so that my hips are not twisted funny. Okay, so now we're just going to sew a diagonal line right along 1/4 inch from that line. And this is my friend Jane. She is my Singer Featherweight. I have a much newer machine in the other part of my studio, but Jane is from 1956, and she belonged to someone's grandmother, not mine. And let me sew this seam and I will tell you more about her. And I like to sew with Jane from time to time, especially on these projects when I'm out here in this room next to my sunny window or cloudy window. It's a cloudy day today. And it just kind of takes me back to a simpler time when sewing machines were often workhorses, and but they also have far fewer bells and whistles than today's sewing machines. So I just like to spend a little bit of time in the olden days, if you will. Okay, so one more seam. All right, so now we've got our seam on either side, both sides of that diagonal line. We're going to go ahead and cut those apart into 4 half square triangles. Right on that diagonal line. Okay, so this is an interesting step where we are. So normally what we're doing is using a ruler of some kind once we've pressed open our half square triangle. However, if we pause for just a minute, there's another tool that I would like to share with you that I use every single day. It's called a Creative Grids Folded Corner Clipper Tool. This happens to be the smaller one. There is a larger one as well. The beauty of this tool that I love so much, I'm going to just scoochy this up here so you can see how I cut this. I'm able to cut my half square triangle accurately without having to maneuver it within a space and make sure that my corners are not quite. Oftentimes if I'm trimming a half square triangle like this, then I'm worried about where this is and making sure this center diagonal line is smack in the center. This way I don't have to. So I'm using this tool and I'm going to line it up. We want this unit, let me double check, I think we want this we want this to be 3, we want to trim this to 3 inches, but I just want to make sure that I have that correct and accurate. Yeah, we want to trim that to 3 inches. So you see I have my 3 right there. I'm going to line this line up with my seam, right? I'm going to give myself just a little bit more room up here because I want to make sure that this is nice and square as well. So I'm just going to line that up there. And I'm going to trim that, and I'm going to trim this little corner off as well. Now I can go flip it this way, and now I can line this right up at 3. See, and then we've got an accurate 3-inch square. Let me pause for just a minute. Where in the heck is that? Just had it. Here it is. Yes. Okay, back. Had to just verify that 3-inch for 1 second. Okay, so now what we have is a 3-inch square right there, and we're going to do that with all 4 of our half square triangles. Make sure my iron is hot. Now, often you will find that your that instructions really oversize half square triangles. And you wind up doing a lot of trimming. And on some levels, I would argue that it's not necessary to go quite so big with our oversizing, except as beginner quilters, it's really important that we give ourselves the most accurate pieces possible. We're learning all sorts of things. We're trying to make accurate seam allowances. We're trying to cut our initial pieces the accurate size, and it takes time to learn that. It takes experience to learn that. So I'm going to go ahead and press these. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is you don't always have instructions in your pattern to tell you whether you should press open to one side or to the other side. The general rule, there are general rules. It used to be that you should never press open because it made your seam weak. Well, the answer to that is making your stitch length just a little bit smaller. If you want that seam to lie nice and flat and you're not matching up with any other seams, you're not nesting with any other seams, go ahead and press open. That's what I'm going to do with these. The other thing is, it might be, you've often heard press to the dark side. Well, obviously that's because you can't see through the you can't see through to the other side. You can't see through the seam allowance through. I'm getting these pressed open. And so pressing them open is going to give me the flattest seam possible. But if I need to be nesting with other seams, then we'll talk about that. That would be more probably the next video, but not with this one because nothing is going to bump in. And that's what's really nice about this churn dash block. Okay, so we've got all of our corners. Now what we're going to do is gather our fabric B, which is a low volume, and our fabric A. So these are the skinny strips, and these are the slightly wider ones. And we're just going to sandwich them right sides together on one side or the other, doesn't really matter which. And we're going to sew those together with our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And this is really good to be able to chain stitch here. And then see, my other machine, my fancier machine has a thread cutter, which I just love. Jane doesn't have that. So I am I'm just going to keep chain stitching, and then I don't have to snip in between. Okay. And really one of the best gifts that you can give yourself is an accurate seam allowance and accurate stitching, accurate seam allowance and accurate cutting of your pieces. And that takes time to grow. And if you don't have perfect blocks, perfect points that match up in every which way possible, don't sweat it. You're growing, and that's what this is about. We're all growing, and we're making the best we can make to be as accurate as possible and become, right? This is a journey of becoming. This isn't about starting out perfect or amazing, you know? Okay, I'm pressing these open too, in case you wondered, because there's no reason not to. And the other people will often ask me, do I have to press on the front or the back, or what is that? You know, it used to be, I think, the quilt police would say, you should press on the front. Sometimes it's easier to press on the back. The other question is spray starch. Do you use spray starch? I rarely use spray starch, unless I'm working with really, really, really tiny pieces. And then I spray starch early. But if I want a little bit flatter business going on, I just use a little spritz of water, and that will make my seam, make my block just a little bit flatter. I usually don't do that until my full block is finished. Okay, look, we've got all of our parts all together, and here is our fabric E center. And then if we look at where's our little illustration? See, that's why we really need this, because this reminds us where everything is. Then this will tell us where everything needs to go. That goes there. That goes there. And I'm a huge proponent of just laying them out. We'll talk more about these little mats that I make too. I think I need to make a tutorial on these. Yes, there are fancy mats that we can buy for sorting our block pieces, but there are easy ways to make them as well. We'll go ahead and put all of these here. Look, there's our block, and we just need to put it together. Now, what we have really are 3 rows, I would call them, okay? So there's going to be a seam allowance pressing. If we want to make this especially nice, we want this to nest. So let's go ahead and do this row first, and we're going to sew this to this and this to this. And if you see, take a look, no seams are bumping into each other, so it doesn't matter whether they're pressed open or from one or to one side or the other. So you just do what makes you feel most comfy about that. Okay, here is our other little guy. Sometimes if you have things that don't just line up straight away, look at that. See, I probably made this, well, this we know is 3 inches square exactly, but I probably used maybe a little bit of a wonkier seam allowance, not quite as accurate. So I'm rushing. This is my very first tutorial video. Can you believe it? I'm so excited. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Okay, so you'll see I've got a little bit of wonkiness there, and it's going to show up in my block unless maybe I just wedge it in the middle there. So it's only just a little bit off here and just a little bit off here, and then when I join it here, it won't show. See, so that's our scrappy, not so perfect tip. Okay, where's my little guy? I like to snip my threads as I go along, otherwise I just get everywhere. And I keep a bin. It can be crazy all over my table, but it doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make me comfortable. It makes me feel stressed. So I tend to use a little bucket. Some people love artsy chaos like that, like this. Let me just tuck those in there. I don't have a lot of space here on my little station. Okay. Okay, so there is that one. Okay, there's that. Let's get this third row or column. We probably want to call it a column, and then these would be the rows, I think. Yeah, see, these are tight. These are right next to each other. Perfect. All right. 3 cheers for me. I like to lay it back down, and then I'm sure that I'm picking it up correctly. Otherwise, if I pick it up and bring it to my piece, if I pick up this piece and bring it to my piece, I can get it twisted up and wonky, and nobody wants to seam rip if we don't have to, but we all do enough of it. Okay. Yes, I could be pinning these. That's the other thing. If you struggle to keep your pieces together, your blocks together, then by all means, pin. But if you don't need to pin, if it's not a complicated block, meh. Okay, so now we've got our 3 columns here. And now we're going to talk about the fact that this seam is going to bump up with this seam and all over here. So what we really want to do is make sure that we're trying to nest these. And so that means we're going to press the seam allowances for this block in one direction, this unit in one direction, this unit in another direction, and this unit in another direction. I like to sew my seam allowances down, up, down. It's just the way I do it. It's just the way I remember it, and that way I'm not keeping track of, oh, which way did I sew that? It's just the way I always do it. So I'm going to press the seam allowances for this block down. Let's do that real quick. And then we're going to press them for this one up. Okay, and then this one is going to go down again. Okay, so now I'm going to take column 1 and join it to column 2. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just wiggle my little guys, my little seam allowances, so that they're right up next to each other. There's a couple of ways you can do this. I use a pin, and then I use something called a what are these called? Fork pins. And then if I put this pin right down into that seam allowance, I'm sorry, into that seam directly, so it is going directly in the middle of both seams. Then I just put this little fork pin in here. Maybe I can make sure that you're seeing this here over top. Then I can pull this out, you see? And then this little fork pin is going to make it so that so this doesn't shift when I'm sewing it. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to put that little pin in there all the way to the bottom. I'm going to get another fork pin. I'm going to just do that. Do you need fork pins? No. Do you need pins? No. Do I always do that? No. I'm just helping. Okay, now look. See how we've got this? You might not see it real well, but let me put this pink here. We've got a little bit of a difference here. But look at, what if we just stretch this just a smidgy? And then we can meet that point. Look, I'm going to stick another pin there. And then I'm going to start that seam right here at 1/4 of an inch. And then once I get that sewn just a little bit, I'm going to just gently tug it. But it's not going to affect what's going on here because I've got this nice and tight in terms of my pin. But we're going to be able to make that nice and flat. Always going to try and pull my pin out. Okay, so now that I've got that seam, those couple stitches in there, I'm going to just gently pull this because it's such a small amount. Okay, and once I get to that fork pin, I'm going to stop because I don't want to run over it. Every once in a while, all it takes is busting a needle to scare the bejesus out of you. Okay. And then once I get to this point, I've got a similar thing going on this other end. So I'm going to just tug this a little bit gently and bring it as close as I can to that end. And I'm going to stitch up to that other fork pin. And I'm going to pull it out gently. Continuing to hold this down on this end so that it stays together. Okay, move this out of our way. Okay, now we're going to bring this one over like this. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to real quick drop our little pin in here. And that one's pretty close, but I'm still going to give that a pin up at the top just to make sure those stay together. Let me get my fork pin here. Right there. I'm going to do the same thing here. So the only thing you really need to be making sure that you're doing, yes, you could pin here, and it wouldn't be the worst idea. However, if you don't pin there, which I rarely do because I'm always kind of in, I'm moving along, folks. I don't want to spend forever pinning and unpinning. You just want to make sure that you are, as you're sewing, that these are staying together. Those edges are staying together. So I'm going to start this one. I'm going to leave that little pin right in there just to give me a little bit more assurance that those are going to stay together, pulling that pin out. This one's a little bit off, so I'm going to squish it this way a little bit. When I'm doing that, I want to make sure that my needle is definitely in the down position so that I'm not shifting that fabric. Okay. Look at, our little block is done. I want to show you my points. See, this is where I used those fork pins. And they came together just perfect. Do they have to be perfect? No, but that's what we strive for. We strive for perfect. We let joy be the journey. Okay, so in this case, no instructions. I don't have any instructions for how I press this. How would I press it? I would press it these two seams going out. because I don't know. In this case, I don't know what's going to come up next to it. Is it a sashing strip? Is it another block? No idea. And we're going to cross that bridge when we get there, because we're building these blocks as we go along, because that's the sampler way of doing it. So I'll do a little short about sampler blocks that used to be published in newspapers back in the, I want to say, the 30s and the 40s. When families were really doing, and this is in the United States, when families were really doing, money was very, very tight. And so feed sack companies would make fabrics, would make feed sacks that were pretty, that people could use, and then newspapers that people could use, ladies could use to make other things, clothes or whatever. But they might use it to make quilt blocks. And so newspapers used to publish a block. No instructions, just a block. Here's what it looks like. And so then the ladies would make their quilt blocks out of their scraps or their fabric or their feed sacks or whatever. Anyway, look at our block. Look at it. I pulled it off of that. I wish we had something dark. But anyway, here's our block. It's done. So what we're going to do is, this is our first block, right? I'm going to tuck it right back here on my little, maybe I'll move that one because I want to look at this one for a little bit longer. I'm going to put it right back here on my board. We've got our box. We talked about our box. So next Wednesday, we're going to have another block. And so what we'll do Wednesday is we will pull some fabrics from our box already, and then we'll pull some other fabrics in so that we can start to grow our sampler quilt just one scrappy block at a time. So if that is something that you want to know about, I hope you will subscribe here at A Scrappy Little Joy so that you get that notification. I think you have to click that little bell so you get that little notification to let you know that the next Weekly Whim on Wednesday block has been posted. If you want to share it, I would love it if you would share it and invite anybody else to come along. Lastly, I also have a new Facebook group, and it is called A Scrappy Little Joy as well. And it is our group for sharing our blocks or for sharing any other scrappy encouragement that we want to share as we go along. And that is how that group is growing and building and becoming, just like you and me as quilters and humans and givers of care out into the universe. So thanks for joining me today.